What's happening, party people? I'm super excited to have another episode of the What's Your Why podcast coming out this week. And this week we have Akira, the Quiet Conqueror, as he goes by on Instagram. He goes right along with this fitness series of athleticism, why people work out, how they work out, what drives them day in and day out, and why they do it. When I started this series, I knew I wanted him to be on there, and I knew that I thought that he'd be a great addition to the podcast. And boy, was I right. So we recorded it this morning. I'm recording this the night before I released the podcast. What we talked about was workout strategies, why we work out, how we work out, what got us into fitness, and work capacity, owning a restaurant, working in the service industry, all the above. It was an awesome time chatting with Akira this morning. I hope to maybe have him on again in the future, but I hope you guys enjoy. And if you do enjoy it, please give it a share. Have a great rest of your week. Thank you. Can you hear me? Oh, you're on mute there. Looks like you're on mute.
How about now?
There we go.
All right.
It's nice to meet you. Kind of face to face. My name is Ty.
Pleasure, man. Akira.
Kira. Been kind of a fan of your page for a long time, so I really appreciate you coming on here.
Absolutely, man. Likewise. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah. Did you get a good workout in this morning? Or
Not yet, man. My schedule's usually about 8 a.m. wake up. I'm on my coffee now. Figured I'd do this and then I'd get after it afterwards.
Okay, right on. I been up for a while now. I coach in the mornings sometimes for a CrossFit class, so I've been up since about 4. That's
Nice,
when I
man.
get my coffee in, but not every day, definitely not.
Never been the early type. For me, I've worked in restaurants my entire life, so it was I saw more sunrises on the way home than getting up usually.
Yeah, I used to work in a restaurant as a server, so I was never a morning person then, and so that was like 11 o'clock closes.
Yeah, I mean, I opened up my first business right in the middle of COVID, and kind of structuring my whole workout regime around that has been interesting. But it's actually kind of allotted me more consistency than I ever had because I was kind of forced to with the lack of time. So now I'm much more regimented about kind of getting anything in, rather as before I would always want to make these like epic long as much as I can things and I had the time to do it. But now it's more like consistently getting in my 90 minutes if I can. And even I think 90 minutes sounds like a lot, but 90 minutes starts like, again, I'm having coffee and I'm start to circulate even what's going to happen and slowly get my body moving. In general, like my body opens up slow. I have to start the breathing process and just kind of getting into the rhythm before I can do, because I love getting into like explosiveness. I love getting into like the intense moments of it. But man, if I do that without getting there properly, especially these days, it doesn't work out in my favor.
Yeah. How old are you?
36 now, about to be 37.
Okay, so you're still fairly young. You're still able to move pretty good, then I can imagine.
I think so, man, but I feel like it's changed so much over the last 10 years, and we'll see how that goes in the next 10. But for me, like the main thing is, I mean, recovery is the main thing. Everything makes an impact more than it used to. Whereas before, I could do some barbaric shit and just wake up the next day and kind of keep rolling, even if it was something that I really felt. Now it's, typically something that I wouldn't even feel while working out can, linger. And if I'm not paying attention to exactly what the causes are, but in doing so, like I've become a lot more in tune with all the causes and trying to figure out this puzzle piece that is my body. I've had kind of jacked up knees for as long as I can remember, since I was a teenager, and slowly uncovering like how my hip is related, and working on all the different functions, to kind of get to, closer to the root of the issues. And so, within, like, even like I was saying, I love the things that I love about fitness are the going intense and not thinking about it and just diving right in. But
Mm-hmm.
all the little uncovering the puzzle pieces are kind of like a big chunk of what I'm busy with, and find interest in, because it is fascinating, and the reward of like being able to move freely, um, is awesome. Even if it's just like somewhat suboptimal, like if, example, overhead pressing, my left is a little wonky and my right feels really engaged. And it's not even about how much I can press or anything. It's more about like my right feels really connected and I feel like I'm moving through the leverages properly. And then my left is like, I'm just not, it's like drawing, like I can draw with my
Mm-hmm.
right and I can't really draw with my left. But trying to piece that together and trying to get that, kind of synergy on both sides is really, that's why also why I love working unilaterally, because I think it exposes so much of that. And a lot of it is just kind of a connection thing for me. So I'm having a lot of fun with that.
You do a lot of like from like my point of view watching your videos, it seems like a lot of just like free flowing through your workouts. Is the movement you're doing usually pretty planned out, like right before you do your set, or are you kind of just moving through it at times? Like we can take, for example, um, my sister this morning, she was in my class and she asked who I was interviewing today. And I showed her your story on the rings yesterday. And was that like planned out, or was that more or less just kind of came to you as you're moving?
It really depends on what it is, right? So like rings, for example, I think you can have an idea, that I want to play with. Like I've been really like kind of obsessed with the meat hooks kind of hanging over one side and letting
Mm-hmm.
your body cross over. Um, but instead of just like, it's not like, dumbbell press where you're just going to do 3 sets of 10 or something. You can kind of, you start to play with different positions that can both like kind of prime that movement and get that movement ready and feeling really engaged and locked, and then also do certain things that kind of pre-fatigue it. So it's like I'm getting, maybe I can only do 1 rep of something, right? Whatever it might be. Like if I'm doing a meat hook off one hand, maybe I just really only have the energy to hold that for X amount of time, or kind of play within certain positions, but I can kind of pre-fatigue certain things, that will make that 1 rep to me more valuable. So it's kind of almost a way of progressive overloading. But to answer
Mm-hmm.
the question, I kind of like, I think with the rings, I can be really fluid, and I feel like it's all net benefit. I can kind of like don't have to have too much of an idea, but there's usually some primary focus, like some movement that I'm busy with, whether it's, different entries to a muscle up, or I don't know, and then the rest will kind of focus around that. Or when I get it and I feel like, all right, I got that, but I'm not doing that again, I can kind of take another 15 to 20 seconds to go through some movements and kind of almost, kind of sand down rough edges,
Mm-hmm.
And so I think with kettlebells, that works a little bit like that too, where you can kind of, again, like some things that is more specific, like an overhead press. All right, I have X amount of weight. I can do this for 5 reps, maybe max. And then again, those last 2 reps, maybe the leverages start getting a little dodgy. I start swinging out to the side. So rather do 3 and then go into like 3 push press, or start to get into something, or I can even do some kind of swings or some flips afterwards. So I'm still kind of getting something more than just those maximal reps, but it's also a little bit more intuitive and fun. And also kind of like, for me, I've never been the like free throw shooter. I can be repetitively like really, I can't, it's not my main interest. Like it's not what my mind
Mm-hmm.
wants to do. It kind of wants to move a little bit more reactively. So even sometimes when like attempting perhaps like a 1 rep max on like an overhead press, I'll do something that would in anything else seem like it's counterproductive, but it gets me like engaged, it gets me primed. So like people ask a lot about the flips. Like the flips is a lot of, is just like mind body connection. I feel
Mm-hmm.
when I hit it right, it gives me a sense of confidence, a sense of like ownership, to where I feel so good about having this right overhead, whereas otherwise, whether you're aware of it or not, there's certain things that are causing some fear or some trepidation that are kind of resisting your ability to do it as best you can. So a lot of that is it's like an ownership thing with the kettlebell. Whereas with the barbell, I feel like there's different things. I think it's more about um, it's more about cues. It's a little bit more scientific. It's a little bit more specific. Like I've been messing with barbells a little bit more recently, and I feel like it's working well. There's some strength loss or some production loss of having not done it in a while, but at the same time, like I feel like I'm moving through the reps a lot better. Almost like how I was talking about the left shoulder not feeling
Hmm.
totally connected. I feel really connected for it. So it's not like I'm lifting the most weight I've ever lifted, but I'm like, I'm lifting this in a way that I feel like I can really make progress rather than just like almost blindly run against this wall and we'll see when that, gives out. Um, so
Did you take a break from like barbell movements for a long time?
I took a break from, well, okay. So I grew up, playing sports and doing the thing.
Hmm.
And then in high school, with football, it's, getting into a weightlifting program. And so I really started enjoying that. And I found myself good at it, but it was like pure grit and ego and friends cheering you on for bench pressing.
Hmm.
And the technique aspect, as much as I'd like to say I was busy with it, in retrospect was probably trash. And then that led to injuries. So somehow along the way in my early 20s, I kind of gave up lifting weights at all and kind of pursued this like, I'm going to do everything body weight for a while. And just because I was also like, I had moved to Miami and I had a bicycle and it's beautiful out and I can just go to any amount of parks and like I can go to the beach and there's a lot of outdoor spaces to go. And I kind of found it pretty, like, I didn't find that I found it pretty limitless. You know what I mean? I found a lot, like just a barbell alone. I felt like there was a lot for me to learn there. So
Hmm.
I spent a good 10 years or so really not lifting weights at all, or for the most part. I might do like, I think I might have had some like dumbbells in the house where I'd do like single leg squats with some dumbbells just to make it a little bit more challenging. But for
Hmm.
the most part, I kind of explored that and it allowed me to be a lot more creative with what I'm busy with, with the limitation of that. But during that period, and as much as I enjoyed it, there was always an itch. And it was mostly like, I feel like with your upper body, I mean, if you can do one arm pull ups and gymnastic stuff, like you're not limited in terms of lifting weights with your upper body. But for like lower body and more so lower body transfer, like with hip, like being able to generate the power and have your hips and your core kind of be able to brace it and go through, there was a limitation. And I always kind of felt this thing in the back of my mind, like, I'm going to get back to that at some point. And I think, I'm not sure if I remember the timelines. There might have been some times where I just jumped into a gym and grabbed the barbell, but there was a tire that was on the beach where I trained, a heavy tire. People gave it, I don't know, all kinds of different estimates, which I think were always over. But I'd like to think it was like 600, maybe 700 pounds. And it was a bit humbling for me. And I thought like I was always kind of, again, confident and feeling I'm strong and adaptable and I can do anything at any time. But I was like, this is, I could do it, but it was a struggle. And then I just kind of got glued to it and became like a bit obsessed with it. And I got it to where I was really, really comfortable and confident with it. But it led me to think like, there's this like transfer of power in the hips thing that I really need to readdress. And somehow got back into barbell training. And then it was on and off because I also don't like to be tied to a gym. There was a really cool gym that I was going to, and then it got shut down for peddling steroids or something like that. Or I went one day and there was like ATF agents all over. And I was like, all right, well, I guess this experience is done. And then I didn't go to a gym after that for a while. And then I went to a Reebok gym on the beach, a CrossFit gym that they kind of allowed me to just be in my little corner and do my weird shit. And then,
Hmm.
classes will go on and they were kind of cool about it. So I had that time period and that kind of just reinvigorated this, you know, kind of passion for resistance, that was a little bit dormant. And I think also because I was so limited for a while, when I got some implements, it really opened up some doors and I was able to think about it differently. But the kettlebells, I think, came into play along that time when I was at the Reebok gym and they had the standard, like, 20, 24, 28, 32 kg. And then, but I was like, I need to have one of these in my house. I need to kind of, this is something I really want to play with. I don't want to have to like wait and show up here. And
Hmm.
I want to really be able to engage with this. So I ended up getting, I think initially I got a, a 22, a 36 and a 40, thinking like 40 is half my body weight. I'd like to be able to do everything with that, and 36 to kind of build up to that, and then a lighter one for, I don't know, whatever else. The lighter one I ended up kind of like almost forgetting about. And then the other two I was just obsessed with. And I was like, oh, this is offering me something that I think with barbell training, what tends to happen is I get like a little linear and I just want to just add weight. I'm bored, add weight. And I'm not realizing that I'm not bringing up maybe the technique, or I'm not bringing up other things along the way. And then I'll get to a point where my grit and determination, leave me stuck at some point, or I'll develop an injury or an imbalance or something. Whereas the kettlebells, I found it, I can have this heavy resistance. I can have this like, even like the bone density element of having something impact you and have it's just a different feeling than even being on a rings. You can really do demanding things on the rings, but it's a completely different feeling than having weight land on your bones. So it offered that, but then it still allowed me to be kind of creative and a little bit more expressive, and not so linear, for which is just for me. I think it works. I
Hmm.
think barbell training is amazing. I just find that if I do it too often, I get a little stagnant, so it's kind of a little bit of a perfect medium. And then even doing mace bells recently, someone gifted me one, and playing with that is super fun. It's like you can really go down any path and get a lot from it. But I'm slowly, as I'm
Yeah.
aging, finding what combination of things works best for me.
Gotcha. No, I love the kettlebells as well. That's the first piece of gym equipment I ever bought for my apartment, back when I was living in Columbus. But the I'm curious about when you were in high school, like, and kind of moving into Miami time, like when you moved to Miami, you said that exercise was kind of always part of your life. After high school and after you left sports, did you compete in like college sports or anything like that?
Yeah, so I mean, I did martial arts since I was like, I don't know, 3 or 4. I think my mom signed me up for judo or something. So this is
Hmm.
always kind of this thing, and especially the competitive thing. And I'm super, super competitive. But after high school, there was I didn't have a path to go towards where I was doing things competitively, and it was just kind of like it was a weird dormant part of me that I at one point must have been, I don't know, very very early 20s. I went to Texas to help a friend open up a gym. It was like kind of it was going to be an MMA gym, kind of in the early days, and I was training with all these guys and jujitsu practitioners and different martial arts, and kind of reinvigorating this. And that all went to a head where I really thought I was going towards that. But short story long is that him and his partner had a big falling out, literal fist fight. We ended up going our separate ways, and I landed in Miami thinking like, that was a weird path that seemed like it was going to go there. And I always felt like, again, almost like the itch of the barbell, there's an itch for me to, and it's probably going to be a jujitsu thing, because it seems like it's the thing that I can kind of go into in my old age. And again, the way I compete is sometimes a little counterproductive to my body. I'm a little intense. I'm a little like, I get a little blind and go through. And I think if I get into it now, I can kind of chill my ego out and really do it for the right reasons. Learning the technique and having it be more of a practice rather than I'm going to try to be the best. I'm, getting to that point where I'm not going to compete for trying to be the
Hmm.
best. And I think maybe that's going to be better suited for me. I've done jujitsu over the years, kind of sporadically with people. And again, like at its best, it's me learning and me being playful, and me mostly being really, really humbled by people who are just fucking me up.
Hmm.
But at times it's also me getting overly aggressive, and I wrestled all through high school, so I'm decent with grappling. I have good leverage and I have good strength for that. And I'll just, my wrestling coach used to tell me even in high school, like I would always try to muscle through everything. Like it's always grit. It's like I'm, as much as I'm focused with technique now, and I kind of always have been, if there's a point where I feel like I'm gonna lose, or if I'm always relying on intensity, and it's a big part of me even now in my training to just like chill the intensity out. It's always there. It's never. I can always kind of turn it on, but I really got to focus on the like listening, intuitive aspect of things a lot more now. Otherwise, it tends to be counterproductive. And in general,
Hmm.
even if I'm quote unquote winning, it's not. It's not gonna lead me to where I need to be. So I mean, the initial
Yeah.
question is about competition. Yeah, in sports, I didn't have that, and I don't. So I've always had to like kind of create my own internal competitions, and
Hmm.
it's become like learning a new thing, learning a new skill, learning uh, something usually movement based. Like it could be short term or long term. Like the long terms is like one arm pull ups has always been a thing of mine, and it's something that I can get decent at, and then it goes away if I'm not paying attention to. And then there's the short term stuff, like even like a kettlebell. The first time I saw someone flip a heavy kettlebell, I was like, ooh, I wanna figure that out. And then just being busy with it. So that's kind of like been, I guess, the substitute for like real person on person competition, because you need the time and the space for that as well.
Hmm.
Like a jiu-jitsu practice is like it's a commitment. You have to afford that time. I've always been selfish to also want like my own. Every girlfriend I've ever had can attest to the fact that I'm a little selfish with my workout time. There's just a period in my time in the mornings, and it can be it can get kind of long, where this is what I need to do for myself. Otherwise, I'm not a good version of myself, in confidence and in ability to be kind of stoic and to be who I want to be. I require that. And without it is, I mean, the center of your podcast is kind of like the why of things. And that's for sure
Yeah.
the why of why I do anything fitness related. It's the only thing kind of tethering me to who I want to be. Everything else can kind of come and go, but I just need that. If I don't have that line to go down, and I can be somewhat loose and go on a vacation and have a different idea of it, but it's always there. I'm always looking back
Hmm.
to it. It's never completely out of arm's reach.
Yeah. Well, I think anybody who works out or does anything in the athletic space would agree with you that they always feel like a better person or happier after their exercise. And it's such a healthy thing to do to start your day with it, that it's gonna make the rest of the day better if you do it right. Your
Absolutely.
your piece you said about jujitsu was almost like identical to the first thing I said when I started jujitsu a year ago. Was so I've been doing like, my dad was a strength coach growing up for the high school, and so from like third grade on, we were lifting, me and my sister, and then um, I or not jujitsu, but CrossFit once I started college, and then 6 years later started jujitsu, and I was like, there's a lot of skill here that I have no idea what I'm doing, because I'm a newbie to this completely. I was like, just tell me if I'm muscling through it, or if I'm using skill. Because I want to learn the skill. I want to. Part of me being here is to learn something new, to find the joy in like a martial art instead of just always doing lifting and CrossFit. And so I definitely feel what you're saying about like the joy of learning and the skill practice with jujitsu and the movement patterns of like kettlebells.
Yeah, the skill thing is, I mean, I think that's when I hear people speaking about jujitsu, it's always that. It's like this uncovering this like puzzle, it's this mental game, right? I mean, it's obviously heavily
Mm-hmm.
physical, and there's an emotional, dealing with your own fears, dealing with your fear of dying, dealing with a lot of stuff, but it's
Mm-hmm.
just like mental practice. It's this real, I think humans need this problem solving thing. For me, like I think the male mind of 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 going into a thing and having a resolution at the end of it is awesome, whether it's one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna figure something out, or you're gonna realize, oh, I need to do this and this next time to be able to figure it out. And I think you can find that in so many things, but when it's when it's really physically demanding at the same time, I think it offers a lot, and it really recalibrates me in my day to day to where everything else kind of seems somewhat doable, some things
Almost like
like,
menial, because it's not like life or
yeah,
death in a sense.
absolutely. And I mean, and then also life's problems they can still be even more overwhelming and more
Hmm.
realistically life or financial death, or these kind of things. But it makes it like it kind of reprograms also to say, okay, well, I can't do everything at once. I have to do this thing that's in front of me right now and do it well, and then the next one and the next one and the next one. So life has this way of being super chaotic and throwing a lot of problems at the same time. And if you're able to kind of have this almost this training of like, all right, well, this thing and then this thing and then this thing, and I'm going to take this progressively, then I mean, it's the only way it's going to get accomplished anyway. And it just kind of sets that for me in a way that I don't have to think about. It becomes like my
Hmm.
baseline reaction to the problems in my life.
You said you own a restaurant, correct?
Yeah,
Or
we
yeah.
opened it May 2020. So like 2 months after everything was shutting down, we were opening a restaurant. It was a bit of a wild time, and it was definitely some of the most stressful and like unknown. I've
Hmm.
kind of ran away from responsibility the good majority of my life. I like thinking of myself as this kind of like nomad vagabond, being able to do whatever I want whenever I want. And I would always run away. But this was, again, it's one of those things that was always an itch of like, well, at some point you're going to have to address this thing and figure it out. And I knew I didn't want to spend my life working for anyone else. Not that there's anything wrong with it, just wasn't
Hmm.
for me. So I knew I would have to do this at some point. And restaurants was just something I was very familiar with, and always thought, oh, I could do that, which is, it's definitely different when it's yours, and there's a whole business and legal aspect that I had to figure out.
Hmm.
But more than anything, it's again, it's responsibility, and addressing like the emotional aspect of that was all pretty intense. And through that time period, man, if I didn't have my regimen, my fitness regimen, which had to really change and had to be a lot more structured than I was used to, which I don't like. But again, it also offers benefit, and I found that like
Hmm.
through that experience doing, I would even being able to prepare for the next day. So let's say like, all right, today, for whatever reason, I really only have 30 minutes. Let me work on my hip a little bit. So tomorrow when I have 45 minutes, or if I have 90 minutes tomorrow, I'm going to really be able to like go into it the way I want to.
Hmm.
Whereas I would never be that forward thinking before. It was always like, what do I have now? Let me just do everything I can and try to seek this happiness that I get from it. Now I was being
Hmm.
a lot more methodical about it because I had to be. And I found that there was so much benefit in that. And I was totally neglecting a lot of elements of kind of, you know, knowing really what my body was asking me for.
Hmm. The reason I brought up the restaurant was, and you kind of were right before you were talking about it, you were saying that it clears your mind and you only think about the one task at hand when you're like in jujitsu or working out. Um, when I served, that was the mindset I had. It's like I didn't worry about school. I didn't worry about my workout. All I was really thinking about was what do I have to get for my table next, or what do they need next, or what does this table need, or can I help one of my other servers or one of my coworkers? And somebody told me about it the other day. They're a fellow server. They're like, I don't think I'll ever not work in a restaurant or in the industry because it's the only thing that truly clears my mind. I was like, I never thought about it like that. But
Probably the first time I ever heard that, to be honest. I think most people's thing is I never want to do this ever again.
uh-huh.
I'm done with this. And I've said it myself many times where I'm like, oh man, I can't with this industry. But it has taught me a tremendous amount. And in terms of like accomplishing, like the whole restaurant thing is this big orchestra of like demands, right? And it's like
Hmm.
there's 100 demands at any given point, and then you have to, at whatever position, if you're a manager, if you're this, if you're that, you have to prioritize the demand. And so you have constantly this like running checklist of like 0 to 10 that you're always marking off, and it's always refilling. And the people who I find who are really good at it are the people who can just manage that in their mind at a high pace, and of the places I've worked, it's always been high volume, high demand, like really, these, you know, these machines that are impressive operations. And it's, again, it's just like functioning orchestra of responsibility.
Mhm.
So it teaches you how to manage that in your mind in real time, under stress, under a lot of demand, under a lot of kind of like a lot of like negative chaotic energy usually. Whether the customer sees that or not, the whole everything going on with that around it is typically pretty intense, and can be pretty abrasive. And then there's like the teamwork aspect, being able to work with people under stress, being able to manage, being able to get what you need out of people. There's so many little elements that over time it taught me so much. And then even now being on the employer side of it, and like working with labor is the biggest part of this whole mechanism, is like finding the right team, investing in the right people, taking people who are willing to learn and learn your system, and do things in the way that you want, and be able to like give people confidence and give them a skill, and especially on the kitchen end of things. And it's been everything. I feel like you can name your industry, and you can, if you really treat it as, if you give it its full worth, you can learn a tremendous amount about it. I think
Mhm.
anything that you're doing, if you're doing it with that intention, is to like allow it to better yourself. It can be really worthwhile. And then, at some point you're going to have to level up, and say, all right, well, I've learned kind of the majority of what I can learn from this. I have to kind of increase the challenge, like with everything else. So whether that's moving towards a different industry, like for me, I would always thought that I would want my kids to do martial arts and work in a restaurant. Those things are both gonna, whatever you pursue in life, if you're doing martial arts and restaurant work as a teenager, you're gonna be somewhat ahead of the curve on other things. But again, it's like anything else. You just have to, see it for what it is. You're not there to, eat shit and just, do what you're supposed to do. You're there
Mhm.
to kind of like gather from it, and figure out everything you can figure out, and uncover things about yourself that you didn't know. And that's the whole point of all of it to me.
Yeah, well, I imagine as an employer now, do you feel like a kind of a sense of pride in being the provider of somebody's income, and kind of like you're giving them a ideally an enjoyable job, um that they enjoy coming to, and you are part of them being able to go on vacations and buy things they want and pay their rent.
No, for sure, man. There's definitely a sense of pride at moments. I have a business
Mhm.
partner, and we speak about it often, because a lot of our like deliberation between each other is again running the team. And it is cool to see a team grow from a couple to, I think, like 25 now. And it's a lot of, there's a lot of effort in kind of molding individuals and setting them up for success, and making sure they're in a position to succeed, and knowing people's limitations. And even like our expectations are always higher than people have of themselves. And not always, but some people can sometimes surprise you, and you think, oh, this person is limited to this and this, and like, they show you, wow, under a time of need, they really step up, and some people don't. And just kind of managing the expectations of that. Every once in a while, through the stress of it, we can kind of sit back and be like, ah, this is really cool. And everyone there is just like kids from the neighborhood, and people who have no background in restaurants, and just
Mhm.
teaching them everything, and taking them from scratch. And it's a good feeling. But it's definitely more stressful than it is gratifying at times, because
Okay.
it's tough. But it's all good. And like,
Mhm.
I'm not, I can be a bit of a chatterbox on the subject of fitness or whatever, but I'm typically a little bit of a hard read in normal life. But every once in a while, if I see something in somebody where I'm like, I can exchange something of like some depth, and a little bit of like, forget this business, like you moving on for the rest of your life, like take a little pride, take a little initiative in finding that, like what we were speaking about earlier, finding that ability to learn, and like, what can you take from this, and
Hmm.
not in terms of monetary or in terms of having a good time. Like, how can you grow from this experience? How can you be better after you leave? I don't expect everybody to work for my company for the rest of their lives. If they do, and my company continues to grow and allows that, that's amazing. But for the most
Hmm.
part, I expect people to be transient. But I'd rather, just like my experiences in various places, I always have little pieces of information, whether I took it from a person or I took it from experience, that allowed me to develop in who I am and hopefully better over time. I want to be able to impart that, but that's not something you can kind of force. That takes like,
Hmm.
that's like the right person at the right moment that's open to it. Otherwise, you're just like that preachy old man, that preachy boss, and it's like, nah, I don't like that. So it has to be the right moment.
Yeah, that makes sense. No, you said you were in Texas helping a friend open a gym. Is that where you're from?
No, I was born in Amsterdam. I
Okay.
moved to the States when I was around 6. Moved to New York. I lived there for a couple of years, and then my family moved down to South Florida, and I stayed mostly. Grew up somewhere between Jupiter, Florida, and Miami, and kind of anywhere in
Mm.
between. The Texas thing was just it's a long story, but again, just kind of helping a friend. He was kind of somewhat of a mentor in the fitness world for me, and thought I could be of some service over there. And again, it was I think 3 months total while I was out there, but it felt like 3 years. It was a very, very intense period of learning and figuring a lot of stuff out, and not just about fitness, just about life and relationships and the dynamics, and even like early entrance and me seeing how to run a business, and
Hmm.
the effort it takes, and the promotion aspect and the logistics aspects and all that. So it was kind of like a hyperdrive for me at that time. But that, leaving there, me and the gentleman I was helping ended up, he was in Miami at the time, so I followed him there, and that I found my little apartment and moved to Miami. I think it was like 2009, and I stayed there ever since. So there's a lot of things you can say about Miami, and most of them are true, but I actually really enjoy it. It's if you find your little niche and you can avoid all
Hmm.
the weird shit that goes on here. It's a cool city that offers a lot, and for fitness, it's kind of somewhat ideal. I mean, it rains a lot, but you can
Yeah.
get around that. You always have at least a couple hours of sun in the day, and it's pretty ideal in that sense.
What what is I was gonna ask, like, what is fitness like in Miami? Is there a big fitness culture?
Oh, it's huge. I mean, it's mostly like aesthetically driven.
Hmm.
This is the place where I sometimes forget because this is my normal life. But when I go anywhere else, I'm like, oh, this is what normal people look like. Because here, everybody is very, very busy with their aesthetic. Everyone dresses to show off their aesthetic. And whether that's like out of personal hard work or a trip to the doctor's office or whatever in between it is,
Hmm.
people are really, really busy with it. So obviously fitness has to be a big component of that. So you have it in different ways. Like there's a lot of outdoor outdoor fitness areas. Like there's one famous one on the beach on Loomis Park, Ninth and Collins, right on Ocean Drive. That's actually, they invested in some really, really cool equipment. It's on my Instagram page. I'm there not so often these days because it's a bit of a zoo. But there is
Hmm.
this kind of like outdoor calisthenic, cool culture there, and they even have like 2 shipping containers of barbells and weights and stuff that's right on the sand, right on the
Oh,
beach.
that's
Super
super
cool.
cool.
And just like every park has little pull-up bars. It's like you always see, you know, regardless of age, you see people outdoors jogging, doing things in the park, doing their little, fitness routines. And you see a lot of like freelance personal trainers leading group classes on like random. It's like you can work out anywhere. So it leads
Mhm.
to a lot of that. And then you have like the gym culture as well. Um, and CrossFit is massive like it is everywhere else. And there's legitimate like powerlifting and, other stuff too. And it's extremely international. So the martial arts fight game, whether it's like the team group kickboxing for everybody classes or like legit world-class fighters fight out of Miami. So there's like a huge martial arts community here.
Mhm.
It's in general, it's very I think it's very, if you're into fitness, it's a really cool place to be.
It sounds like an awesome community. When I was, so I live in North Dakota, um, and then I was in Ohio for a while, and both of those places, like Ohio more so than, or is better than North Dakota, but here it's like everyone, like nobody cares about working out. It seems like, unless um, from like an average point of view. Now I surround myself with people who do work out quite a
Hmm.
bit, so my point of view is a little bit more jaded. As I coach fitness classes and I go to jujitsu, and everybody except for two people in my office all met at a CrossFit gym. But then in Ohio, it was a little bit better, and I feeling it's because of it's a little bit warmer, and so people are outside more,
Hmm.
and you're able to um, work out more outside throughout the year. And then I spent about 4 months living in DC, and it was a huge difference. And obviously, DC is not nearly as hot as Miami, but you're not getting snow for 4 or 5 months of the year. And so, like, there's a huge cycling scene in
Yeah,
DC, and there's a huge
and
running
running as
scene.
well, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And so it was crazy to see just the shape of people change from living here, then living in Ohio, and living in DC. Just
But
like
so let
just
me ask
people
you,
look different.
in North Dakota, because I'm imagining as you're talking about it, is because there's like people who your regular life is a little bit more like you have to be like life is a little bit more demanding physically in certain areas. Like I think of like, you know, wrestlers out of Iowa who grew up like on the farm and they were just doing
Hmm.
work all the time. And they have this like tensile strength from that, that I'm imagining like as you get away from big cities where life is somewhat more demanding, that is why people aren't busy. Like my dad was always looking at me exercising and being like, why aren't you like, aren't you building something with that energy?
Hmm.
Why aren't you, you know, it was always for me, obviously I have my answers to that. And I think there's something towards, again, the exploration, mind body connection thing. But when life is hard and, you know, everything you do is somewhat demanding, you have less of a need for this. I mean, there's always a demand for physicality in life, but
Hmm.
life used to kind of just demand it on its own. You didn't have to seek it out. Where if you live in a city and I'm not foraging and hunting and I'm not working, you know, whatever I'm doing, then I have to kind of create it. But is
Hmm.
it that, or is it just people are sedentary and they're
Well, um, like I live in Fargo. It's the biggest city in North Dakota. And I grew up about 20 miles southwest of here in a smaller farming community. Um, and so you do see some of like the farmer kids that are used to working hard, and um, but we don't have like the ranch style around here as much. And like there was some, and like they were definitely fit kids. But a lot of the agriculture around here is like crop
mm,
production. So you're sitting in a lot of tractors, but there is definitely manual labor that comes from it. And there is a sense of like a work ethic that is established in a lot of those guys, and in those guys and gals that I went to school with. They're always just putting in work, whether it is like actually like making them like a fitter human, or just
mm,
having the capacity to work long hours on something that they're interested in. Like they're able to drive truck for sugar beet harvest for from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m.
mm,
for a month. And when that's not their normal schedule, but they just like
yeah,
that work. And so they're able to, it is a different type of work capacity. And like you bring up that farm strength kind of, but we're also a big city. So like I have the ability to, and we're a big city that has a ton of parking. And so everybody can drive. There's not
mm,
bad traffic. And so it's easy to drive. And so I walk like 100 feet to my car. And then I drive to
yeah,
my office, which is only a mile and a half away, not even. And but if I was living in DC, that'd be like, oh yeah, I just walk to work. That'd be
yeah,
an
yeah.
easy decision just to walk. But there's so much concrete and parking lots here. It's insane. Um, and so like the public transportation or like biking scene here is not there because it's like honestly not safe to bike because
Yeah.
there's not a lot of people do it. So people just aren't aware of bikes. And so it breeds a more sedentary um, lifestyle of like you just drive everywhere. You don't walk
Yeah.
places. You don't do that kind of stuff,
Yeah,
which is
it's
unfortunate. But
it is. It's funny because it's those things that you don't recognize unless you have to do it. Like I've spent a decent amount of time in Costa Rica, and everything was, up and downhill. Like everything is just somewhat
mhm,
difficult. It wasn't this like accessibility of anything. It just didn't exist. So you just end up doing a lot more, and you're not even realizing it.
mhm,
My so like I said, I'm from Holland originally, from the Netherlands, and my grandfather, that everything is built like, I was born in Amsterdam. Everything is built very high. So
mhm,
he was an artist, and he had his little atelier on the top of his. It was like a 4-story kind of very narrow building, and he would walk from up and down those 4 stories every day. And
mhm,
he was a very thin old man at the end of his life, but I felt like that kept him somewhat alive, and
mhm,
he wasn't like, this is, you know, in general, I feel like people in the Netherlands, it's more about the intellectual, artistic side of things. They're not so much. Yeah, there's definitely a community of kickboxing and different things that come out of Holland, and soccer is huge or whatever. But I feel like a lot of it is like fitness is for morons kind of thing. So he definitely wasn't busy with fitness at all. But this idea of just going up and down these very, very narrow little stairs that are very steep and short stairs every day,
mhm,
up and down, it just kind of added this, like, it's a resiliency, right? It's just, you're not counting anything. It's just, this is life. This is the way it is, right? And that's not a hard life. There's many harder lives. But when you were talking about resiliency earlier, of even being able to like mentally be behind the wheel and focused on a task for 10
mhm,
hours at a time, that's interesting to me. Like that idea of just putting in work, even like with fitness, when people have questions about like implements and barbell to dumbbell to kettlebell or whatever it might be, it's like, especially in the beginning, it's like, just put in work. Like increase your capacity for resiliency,
mhm,
increase your capacity for like disciplining that little, the thing in your mind that wants to give up through things. Like if you can just work through that, you can spend 10 years on that alone, especially in the early development. And I think that was the mentality of wrestling when I was younger, was all just like, just go through the constant barriers of limitations that are set up in your mind, and work through that. And then
mhm,
you can get into the other stuff, and like skill work is always part of the equation. But I think people just kind of forget about this capacity for work, and they think about like exhaustion. Like everyone loves to just go to exhaustion. It's like, oh, I feel like I've done something. It's like, you know, again, using a jujitsu example, is that's what you don't want. You never want to get to exhaustion. You always want
mhm,
to somewhat be able to navigate prior to that, and exerting the amount of energy that you need. So once you get to exhausted, you're done. You're going to get killed soon. So even with workouts, I treat it a lot more like that. Like I'm trying to keep this engine at somewhat of a high RPM, but never really letting it get to those real critical moments unless I need to, where I say, all right, well, I'm just going, like just red light, red zone, and
yep,
get into it. But for the most part, it's like kind of cultivating this capacity to be at this higher wave. And I'm not big on high intensity cardio, even though I feel like I do enough. It's just more about being in this heightened state of mind where I really feel dialed in and I really feel connected. But a lot of that is again building this foundation for like resiliency in the beginning, of just being able to like tolerate, like what can you tolerate, and
mhm,
and doing other things that are passive, like ice bath and sauna and stuff. Just being able to like tolerate uncomfortable conditions, in general. Even like Miami, one of the big things that I have the advantage, like we're sea level. I don't have altitude training. There's a lot of things that I don't have. But what I do have is I can work midday from 12 to 3, 4 p.m. in the sun in 100% humidity, where most people don't want to get out of their AC car, or if they do, they're getting out of
mhm,
AC car to AC restaurant to AC apartment building or whatever it is, and I'm out there in the sun just getting killed, and it feels good. And every year it's a little bit like we're now tapering off finally, where the rains start coming in, and the heat isn't, it just started kind of cooling down a bit, but August is brutal. And leading up to that, be like, oh, it's hot in May. And then June, I'm like, oh man, I forgot about this. In July, I'm like, oh no, this is another level. And then come August, I'm like really, really dealing with it. But every year I get to like progress through that. And it's to me, it's really, but it's a lot of suffering. Like it's a lot of like,
Hmm.
this isn't really fun. Or if I have a stupid idea to like take a kettlebell on my bike and like go to a park, I'm miserable throughout it. And I'm like, oh man, I don't know if I can make it home. Do I call an Uber? And then I just end up doing it and, working my way home. And by the time I'm done, I'm truly exhausted. And again, my goal is not exhaustion. Like I try to avoid that. But every once in a while, you have to push that like resiliency aspect and just say, well, I can do that. So anything else is somewhat within my wheelhouse to be able to explore.
Yeah, I saw one of your videos or back in the day where you like were at a park and you brought your kettlebell with you there, is what it looked like. I would assume that you put like a backpack or something like that. Is that right?
Well, it depends. I mean, if I'm on my bike, I think like a 50-pound kettlebell is pretty much all I can handle because again,
Yeah.
it's like a backpack. It's not super comfortable, um, and it's somewhat at some point it's just more counterproductive. But typically what I would do um, is I'll grab a few of them, put them in the back of my Jeep, and I'll park somewhere. But even that walk is like it's a good
Hmm.
farmer's carry, and especially if I'm carrying three, it becomes a little interesting because then I either have to do two in one hand or like rack one, and it's always a bit of a mission. Or I'll carry two at a time and then come back for the
Hmm.
other one, and I'm doing like relays of farmers carries before I even get to work out. And I haven't done that in a while, probably because it's just such a pain in the ass. But it's good. Again,
It
like
has to be
the
so good for
farmer's
you.
carry thing is a nice warm up, and then when you're totally exhausted and you're done with your workout and you still got to take it back home,
Yeah.
that's a whole nother element. Or even like I'll go to fill up the sandbags I just take sand from the beach, and then I got to walk that back in the car, which I don't even know how long that is, but it's a good ways, and that whole trip is, again, it's like, well, this just has to be done. It's not like I'm saying, well,
Hmm.
four sets of 10 or whatever I'm doing. It's like, no, I just got to get there. And sometimes I'm like, oh man, I bit off way more than I can chew. This was a bad idea. But you somehow manage and you get it done,
Hmm.
and it's good. But there's nothing like being in a big open public park space with a couple kettlebells. It's a very freeing thing. I could take my rings. I feel like I have everything I need at my fingertips. And it's a little bit like I can get a little, isolated doing my workouts in my own house. Sometimes it's nice just to have some energy around and some people. And again, like if you go to like South Point Park, it's like the southern tip of South Beach. There's a really, really beautiful outdoor park space there. And there's always people are just busy with the right stuff. People are running stairs and
Hmm.
jogging and rollerblading and climbing trees. And it's just fun. It's fun to be a part of that sometimes. But for the most part, I think 90% of my time is just like in my little dungeon in my own head, putting in
Yeah.
the work.
I so but like, the reason I brought that up is I did that, brought it to a park and when COVID first kind of started,
Mm,
because when we everything got shut down in Columbus, and then we went to there, but there was still this giant turf field that Ohio State used to have their for anybody to use. Really, it was a public park, but it was just a public turf football soccer field, and there'd be a ton of people working out there doing their own thing, like a group of flag football going on, game of soccer, people working out, and I hauled like my freaking kettlebell a mile and a half, and on the backpack. I was like, well, if he can do it, I can do it. And so I walked it there and I was like, this was awful. We can just do kettlebell swings in the apartment from now on. But I thought that was like just badass. I like just carrying your equipment to a different place to use it somewhere else and just in a
yeah.
different scene.
And maybe, I thought about it like getting like a wheelbarrow or doing something that like made sense. But again, there's something fun about doing it. Again, you have to kind of know what you're doing because if you're
Hmm.
so exhausted that when you get there, you really can't do anything, that's also not useful. But, for the most part, I can take, even if I take two like 48 kgs and I got
Hmm.
one in each hand, that's more than enough weight for any kind of workout that I need, and I'm good. Or I'll take like
Hmm.
a double of a lighter weight and then one heavy one, and it's like, man, the possibilities are somewhat
Yeah.
endless. So I have
You
my
can do
little
a lot
spots
with that.
that I like for that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
um Yeah, no, it's fun. Again, you don't want to do that every day, but sometimes you want a mission. Sometimes you want something to
Hmm.
break up the monotony of things. Sometimes you just need, to do something cool.
That and it is, and like that's what I love about kettlebells. I have this fascination with stones. Just
Mm.
like there's a ever since I moved into this apartment, there's this like a just a big rock at the entryway. And I was like, I want to lift that rock. And
Yeah.
ever since I
Any
watched
idea of how much
Stone
it
lift,
weighs?
I would assume it weighs a little over 100. Um, it was smaller than I thought it was when I actually walked up to it because I lifted it last night for the first time, and I have a rock in my apartment that's like 85, and then this one was significantly heavier, but it still wasn't that heavy. So I'd say it's around 120.
What's funny
Um,
with those things is it can be even like something could be the same weight and just be tremendously harder to lift just because
mhm.
it's not as ergonomic or whatever. Like that's why I like about those kind of like random odd object implements is it forces you to adapt in a totally different way. And you can like not necessarily you can turn off the like cueing technique side of the brain and just work on the like let me figure this out. How does this want to move kind of side of the brain that I really like. That's the cool thing about like the heavy tires. If anything, I feel like I need a little bit more of that. The sandbags offer that to a degree, but
Mhm.
you become aware of how to move it. So rocks and things like that are
Yeah,
awesome. It's just, this is a new experience. I got to get to this thing and just figure it out and see. And it's a lot of grit. It's a lot of this is painful. This rock is jabbing into my right bicep.
mhm.
So you're figuring all this out. And at the same time, the whole thing is uncomfortable.
It definitely showed a big weakness I have right now, which is like my hip drive,
Mm.
which I did a ton of CrossFit, Ollie lifting, for a long time. And then the last like 2 years, I got super deep into running, like ultra running and then jujitsu as well. So my time was more spent on running and jujitsu the last 2 year or less year. And I went to go lift another stone last night. That was in a construction site next to us here. And I was like, shit, I have no hip drive right now. I was like, I need to get back and doing some more cleans and snatches here. But
It'll come back. I mean,
yeah.
it's good those reminders. It's good to just say, this is this thing. I'm missing out on this a little bit,
Hmm.
and get back to it. You had mentioned we were talking about going to this turf that like during COVID times, trying to figure out how to work out, and it
Hmm.
sparked in my memory like that was an interesting time. Like for me, again, I'm pretty adaptable and used to going outside, but they were like shutting down parks and doing all this like counterproductive in my mind stuff, and even like beaches were closed down. It's like it was
Hmm.
really difficult. I would like have to navigate, but that was I think that's what started the whole bringing a kettlebell to a park thing was like I had to find I mean, I could do stuff in my apartment, but even that apartment was less suitable to work out than the one I'm in now because I have this outdoor space to use. But that was like, you have to, there's no gym open, there's no nothing, you got to go
Hmm.
carve it out or again, become sedentary. But that was just not an option for me.
Yeah. No, the that park actually shortly afterwards got shut down and they got turned into a parking lot, which I was
Tragedy.
super upset about it. I remember just like snapping multiple groups of people I had in Columbus. I sent them Snapchats like, look at this fucking thing, and they're a fucking medical parking lot because
No,
Ohio State has so much medical stuff.
no.
And I was like, what is the need? Just build parking ramps so you don't have to take up so much land. But I was like, it's such a cool thing, and there'd be like Thursday at 2 o'clock, so like just a random time when most people are at work, there'd be 50 people there working out. And then in
Yeah,
the
it's awesome.
afternoon, even more. I was like, this is such a good thing for the community. There's a mile running loop that went around this area too, and that was closed off as well. I was like, what are you guys doing? I was like,
Yeah.
this is
No,
the
man. I
mental
mean,
health of the community.
that man, that was like the hardest part. Like, or not, there's many hard parts of that whole situation, but it's like some of that was like everything that you should be doing was somehow not allowed or made to be extremely difficult.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like outdoors, fresh air, exercise, working through your body. It doesn't make any sense. I feel
Yeah.
like through that process, though, a lot of people did realize like, oh, there's a lot of ways that fitness is more important for
Hmm.
most people than obviously for the athletes and people who specialize in things. It's always been a part of it, but for I think most people now realize, oh, I need to somewhat be busy with this, and it can be accessible. It doesn't have to be this thing.
Hmm.
The gyms are not for everybody. That's a specific thing, and there's a lot of different ways to explore this, and I think it showed a lot of people how to figure that out, at
Yeah,
least.
and that was very obvious in Columbus when it was like a New Year's resolution kick at your local
Mm,
gym, but times 10. And I was like,
yeah.
oh, this will last 2 months. But it didn't. When I first moved to Columbus, there was not that many people who were out running on the trails, or run on the streets. And until I left Columbus and moved back here to Fargo, it was people were still outside taking up the sidewalks. And I like to do my own thing when I run. I don't like being around a lot of people, but it was still cool to see a lot of people out there still using and still working out. And so I don't know, maybe it died down a little bit more there, but it's definitely not as big of a thing here still. But it lasted significantly longer. I think it's because people's eyes were open to the ability to work out outside and the ability just to go for a walk, and what that can change for you.
Exactly. Like the little things, it doesn't, I think that's the perception of things is always a little bit grander, right? And you feel like, oh, I
Hmm.
have to do this fitness thing and I don't even know, I don't know what to do with these weights. And it's like, no, 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 just start wherever you start and you
Hmm.
grow it. I think people started just, if you give it enough time to develop a routine and again, shut off, like, especially if you've been really sedentary and somewhat dormant, I can imagine that voice to not continue is really strong. Once you break through that a bit, it's got to be really, really liberating for people. Like the feeling that I get from it is so empowering that I can imagine even on smaller levels, it's like it's got to feel good if you give it
Hmm.
just the right enough amount of time. And I think because that whole shutdown lasted so long, it's like people got enough time to just say, well, I got nothing else to do. I'm going to do this. And it
Yeah.
sticks because they gave themselves the time to do it. And they did it in a way that was like they were able to do on a day to day. And whether now
Hmm.
they can get back to work and do different things, if they can manage that, I think for a lot of people, they're going to figure it out because, again, it's just so beneficial. And once you feel that for yourself, you're like, how can I stop this? I don't want to feel
Yeah, it's
differently.
true. And I think a big part of it is that maybe like why it's not so significant here still is because shutdown was a lot shorter in North Dakota than it
Mm,
was in Columbus, Ohio. Mandates and everything lasted significantly longer there. Um, and like so I've coached here and I coached down there for CrossFit. And when I moved out of Ohio at spring of 21, I was still having to wear a mask to coach. And then when I moved back here, they never had to wear a mask to coach. And so the shutdowns and the lockdowns may have kept people outside and may have kept people doing the routine they started at the beginning of the shutdown.
yeah.
And so that could have something to do with it. But I think a lot of it, the thing that I was most surprised at is because I'm an education guy. That's what I went to school for education, got my master's in education, and everything I do, it's like, oh, I want to learn how that works and how to do it and how to do it better. And the one thing I was surprised by is there wasn't like education resources put out to people to learn how to go get out and do something. It was just kind of forced by
Yeah.
boredom to get out
Yeah.
and move, which I thought was
And with
super
that,
fascinating.
we have the luxury of like, I mean, there's a lot of garbage on YouTube, but man,
Hmm.
find a good amount of information in
Yeah.
whatever modality you want. To where if you're saying, I even like, yeah, I mean, I've never ran before in my life. Like, are there some tips? Is there some tips about breathing? I don't know. Or you figure it out on your own, like I tend to do. But man, if you want technique on anything, it's out there. It's such a cool time. Even like when I started, kind of really training out on my own, like in my early 20s and trying to figure things out. I had little things where you can watch a YouTube video of like,
Hmm.
even calisthenic stuff. I was watching these guys in New York doing like ridiculous stuff on a pull up bar. And it wasn't a tutorial, but it was like, oh, that's possible. Like for me,
Hmm.
that's everything. It's like watching someone do something and being like, oh, that's possible. Let me see, let me see how I can get there. And then for certain technical things, like if you're into Olympic lifting, like you're going to need some cueing and some coaching and some
For
things. But
sure.
for most things, I feel like you can just watch someone do it and be like, all right, but let me put myself in that position. And it's cool to have this database out there of all the awesome things people are busy with, especially like with kettlebells. I started like, with Pavel and seeing how he did things. And I was like, all right, well, that's that. That seems like that's very
Hmm.
structured and cool. Like that gave me some basics. But then just watching people just do incredible things, especially with, a little bit more of like the out of the norm, like even like heavy kettlebell flipping,
Hmm.
I was like enamored. I was like, man, this is awesome. I'm so if I never saw that, I don't know if I'm intuitively gonna get into that. So it's just cool to be exposed to so much stuff that's out there now that whatever your interest is, there's almost no excuse to not do something. It's just so varied, and it's, I don't know.
Well, I think the most fascinating thing to me about like the kettlebell is how adaptable it is and how you can flow through it. I think I saw that from you, but I also saw it from this guy Marcus Philly. Um, he's a CrossFit guy out of California, but
Yeah, I know.
does okay, yeah. I both of you guys showed that like there's so many different ways to use a kettlebell, and it's fascinating to me.
Yeah, man. I mean, even like with the kettlebell stuff, I'm pretty novice. I would have to say, like, I haven't been
Mhm.
doing it for that long, but because I have such a background in just working with anything, and like I feel like I'm pretty adaptable, and I can kind of learn things somewhat quick, and I have somewhat of a base of strength with things. But yeah, man, it's super limitless. There's still things now that I haven't even really explored, and even like I do a lot of single kettlebell work, mostly because of what I have
Mhm.
access to. But then I watch people do double kettlebell work, and it's its own thing. It's like I
Mhm.
could spend the next 12 months really being busy with that. Like there's just so much out there for that, within the world of kettlebells. And if you want to do like the endurance sport thing, if you want to just go for like pure strength, and like I watch some of these Russian dudes who just do wild stuff, and like body weight, bent presses, and stuff like that. It's like, man, again, you can really, it's pretty limitless whether you're, whatever avenue you want to go towards. It's like you can invest a good amount of time and still have room to grow in so many fields. That makes it interesting for me, like, especially because I don't tend to specialize. I want everything to have somewhat of a carryover. I want my work on the rings to kind of help me with my kettlebell stuff. I want all that to be able to be applicable to a barbell, even if I don't use it for a year at a time. I want it
Mhm.
all to kind of work synergistically, and I'm finding a lot more of that, like really understanding. I think that part of the kettlebell too is like you start to understand leverage a lot better. Whereas if you grab a dumbbell, you're like, I move this from here to here, and it becomes somewhat linear, at least in your mind, even if it's not,
Yeah.
even if your bones are doing a lot of rotation and stuff, you don't really notice it. But when you're doing with kettlebells, I mean, if you're doing a bent press, man, you really start to understand positioning and leverage and all these things. And it to me, it really opens it up to where I can get on a pair of rings, and I feel like my shoulder is structurally more stable and stronger in different ways. And it all kind of like, it all helps each other.
Yeah, they all tie together. So it's like there's submissions I've gotten on people in jujitsu because I have more strength than them. And it's just
Mm-hmm.
simple. And I have
Mm-hmm.
a long a long time spent in the gym that has given me the ability to know how to move to get to this different position. One of our coaches has a at jiu-jitsu has a long history of like college sports, and he does everything in lifting terms. He was like, you're gonna do this movement like a deadlift or like an RDL, and to
Mm-hmm.
me it's perfect. Like it just clicks.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, but we're over an hour here. I don't know. That's what I was asking for.
Cool, man.
Maybe I would like for you to share like maybe your page and maybe like the name of your restaurant, whatnot, whatever you want to, and I'll let you get back
Sure,
to your
man.
day.
Instagram's the Quiet Conqueror. It's really just there's no purpose for it other than me having a catalog of stuff I'm busy with at any given
Hmm.
point. So it's fun for me. But people take to it, and I get to meet people like you, and,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
people take interest in because I kind of go my own little path. So that's cool. The restaurant is called Uptown 66, Miami proper, Biscayne and 66th Street down here. So if you're ever in the area, come through for some good food. And that's it, man. But it was a pleasure.
Awesome.
Cool to
It
chat.
was a pleasure. It was nice to meet you over Zoom here. I got to come to Miami at some point. So if I do, I'll check out the restaurant
through.
for sure.
Let me know, man.
Sounds good. Well, I appreciate you coming on. Have a great rest of your day here.
Absolutely, brother. Take care.
All right. See ya. Another awesome episode. I'm so thankful that Akira came on the show. I definitely want you guys to give him a follow if you're into the fitness world. If you're into looking at a handsome guy doing some pull-ups, doing some ring exercises, his page is a great one to follow. And so you can find him on Instagram at The Quiet Conqueror. And then also go check out his restaurant if you're ever in Miami, Uptown 66. Both his Instagram and his restaurant are linked in the description of the podcast wherever you find it, and on Instagram here. But I really do appreciate you guys coming back for more. We got more content coming along with this series next week and a few more interesting characters along the way. Appreciate the listen, guys. Have a great rest of your day.